Powerhouse global consulting firms recruit the best and the brightest and troubleshoot and advise on almost every industry under the sun. It is a multi-billion-dollar business. But in both private enterprise and the public sector, do they deliver value that adds up for everyone? Michael Forsyth is co-author of When McKinsey Comes to Town, the hidden influence of the world's most powerful consulting firm. Michael Forsyth is an investigative reporter at the New York Times, and he joins us now from NYT HQ on Manhattan Island in New York City. Michael, it's great to have you on the program. Congratulations on the book. It's terrific. I want to start just by, let's do a couple of quotes here from the book just to set up our conversation, shall we? Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this graphic. People the world over are largely unaware of the profound influence McKinsey exerts over their lives, from the cost and quality of their medical care to the jobs that pay for their children's education. The firm has advised virtually every major pharmaceutical company and their government regulators, along with health insurers, airlines, universities, museums, weapons makers, private equity firms, casinos, bookmakers, professional sports teams, and media companies, including the New York Times. Operating in more than 65 countries, they can whisper in the ears of despots and elected leaders alike. And one more quote here. One former McKinsey consultant wrote anonymously, "To those convinced that a secretive cabal controls the world, the usual suspects are Illuminati, lizard people, or globalists. They are wrong, naturally. There is no secret society shaping every major decision and determining the direction of human history. There is, however, McKinsey and Company." Okay, Michael, start there. Does McKinsey really control the world?
No, of course, McKinsey doesn't control the world, but it has an enormous influence. Unlike any company I can imagine, Ford makes cars, Johnson & Johnson makes, baby powder, or did. But McKinsey is everywhere. It advises, almost all the major companies in the world, not just in the United States, not just in North America, all over the place, and so many governments. And we wouldn't have written this book unless we were convinced that the advice McKinsey did, the work McKinsey does for so many of these organizations, is profoundly influential.
Well, let me hammer away on that word advice, because the reality is they advise, they don't decide. It is still the companies that they advise at the end of the day that decide. Does that give them some political cover in your judgment?
It always, in the past, has given them political cover. Sure, they advised Enron, and in fact, the CEO of Enron was a former McKinsey senior partner. But McKinsey didn't get, prosecuted, sued, or anything, for that case. But it has started to catch up with them. Just last year, McKinsey was agreed to pay more than $600 million in the U.S. To settle state investigations into their work with opioid makers. So, and there are other lawsuits in other areas going on, and there's probably more money to pay for opioids. So while they do have some cover, because it is always the client's decision, sometimes the advice they give is so decisive that they do get caught up themselves.
This is a company that's been around for almost 100 years. How do they describe the values that they claim to live by?
So a lot of companies have mission statements and values, but McKinsey really is different because they do take it seriously. And this is kind of the crux of our book. The values that they espouse, are really, in a way, the only way we could have written this book, because their most important value, the one that's number one, is to serve the clients and to put the client's interests above that of the firm. They have many other laudable, kind of obvious values, preserve client confidences, work with integrity. Also a very interesting one, which is an obligation to dissent, which McKinsey consultants have actually done, and it's in our book. But when you work for a client that may not be an ethical actor, whether an authoritarian despot or a maker of OxyContin, and you're doing everything you can 24/7 to serve them and to serve their goals, that's a problem.
Well, having said, you did say in the book that when consultants are hired at the company, that they are asked, are there any organizations or countries or businesses, whatever, that for your own ethical reasons you don't want to work for? And they apparently take that seriously, do they not?
They really do. So a lot of younger McKinsey consultants come in and say, I don't want to work for a coal company. I don't want to work for a tobacco company. And McKinsey does honor that. The problem with that, though, is it puts the ethical onus, the big ethical decisions, on very young 25, 26-year-old consultants rather than with the big boys and girls, the 40, 45, 50-year-old senior partners. They're not the ones that have to make the ethical decisions. That allowed McKinsey to keep working with tobacco makers, like Philip Morris until last year, which is, to us, is just absolutely crazy.
Well, let's pursue that. How do they say with any consistency that they are pursuing good ethical conduct while at the same time, I think the word you used was in the book, they urged Purdue to turbocharge their sales of OxyContin or work for tobacco manufacturers?
Yeah, it's hard to square that. There are a lot of really good people who work at McKinsey and other consulting companies as well, and so many of them talk to us, which we're very grateful for. And we've made friends, and just these are people you really do want to be friends for life with. And so there are a lot of ethical people there. They hire that way. But the problem is there is a huge contradiction between, working effort, tirelessly for a client that is a bad actor and doing everything you can to do whatever they asked you to do. In the case of Purdue Pharma, it's to boost their profit and acting ethically.
How actively entwined are they in the Chinese government and or Chinese-run companies?
So we got a lot of access to the McKinsey client list. Also, China, God bless them, is a country where you can actually get a lot of information on a McKinsey client work because these state-owned enterprises actually announce it. They put it on their website that they're working with McKinsey. So among the biggest SOEs in China, state-owned enterprises, these are companies that their leaders are picked by the Organization Department of the Communist Party. McKinsey works for at least 26 of the 100, or has worked for them in recent years, of the 100 central ones. They work for some provincial and city governments. They have worked with some of the national government in China as well. So it's quite extensive.
Does that mean that they are likely urging policies on the Chinese government and or Chinese-led companies that could be antithetical to what the United States and or the West want?
Well, yes, it's true. There, I don't think anybody could argue that, McKinsey needs to be in China, as do other, Western firms, to help, in the past, to help those companies become more modern, become more, profitable, better run. But since the rise of Xi Jinping and the rise of, increased authoritarianism, bordering on totalitarianism in China, McKinsey's kind of doubled down. And so they back some of these national policies, like the Belt and Road policy, and they actually talk about this in their global pitches to other clients, basically drumming up business for China.
Let me ask you a question where China, McKinsey, and Canada all come together. And they do in the person of this country's former ambassador to China, Dominic Barton, who happens to have been a former global CEO for McKinsey. What will he be remembered for in terms of his contribution to the company?
So, under Dominic Barton's watch. So Dominic Barton was the head of Greater China and worked out of Shanghai before he became the global managing partner for McKinsey in 2009. And he had that post for 9 years until 2018. It was under his watch at McKinsey that so many of the problems in our book festered. The work with Purdue Pharma, for example, the work with authoritarian countries, the work in South Africa, which is also another place where McKinsey's actually been called, to task by the government there and is under a criminal probe right now. So many of those problems started or festered under Dominic Barton's watch, and in China, that he was the one, under his watch, or his double down. His name in Chinese, Bao Damin, is all over the Chinese language documents, pushing these government policies like Belt and Road.
Are you alleging that he's done anything illegal, or is this merely a case of the optics don't look great?
We haven't found anything, that he's done illegally. It's it's that's not the case. Of course, he could have, but we certainly didn't find it, and we certainly didn't allege it in the book.
Okay, we mentioned in that quote off the top that McKinsey's done work for the New York Times. Do you know what they've done for your paper?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot here, but I'm a journalist, so I'm not going to dodge any question by another journalist. I do know that McKinsey did some work on the work towards a subscription model for the New York Times, and actually that's worked out quite well. Not everything that McKinsey does is a disaster. Sometimes their advice is quite good, and so I know that McKinsey was working on that major effort to move us away from an advertising model to a subscription model.
And that may be the lifeblood of your paper going forward, yes?
Yeah, and I don't know the details of exactly what they did and whether their advice was critical to our success, but they certainly were involved in that area.
Gotcha. Well, we want to add a couple of other voices to our conversation here, so let's bring that conversation home to Canada and introduce in our nation's capital Amanda Clark. She is Associate Professor at the School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University. And here in our studio, Jaemin Chin, VP of Strategy Corp's Management Consulting Practice. He's also formerly with KPMG, which is another one of these big management consulting firms. And Amanda, Jaemin, we welcome you to our program as well. Let's just, in terms of setting up our discussion to come here, put some stats up here. The three most elite management consulting firms, McKinsey, Bain & Company, and Boston Consulting Group, now generate $20 billion in revenues in 150 countries. They staff nearly 50,000 people, some with starting salaries as much as $250,000 Canadian, with bonuses. Harvard Business School and Wharton now send more than a quarter of their graduating class into consulting. Okay, Jaemin, start us off. What is the essential service that you think firms such as yours and others provide?
Well, I think it might be an unsatisfying answer, but the simplest way to describe it is that management consultants help clients with problems that they either don't have the capability or the capacity to solve themselves. And that can be very broad. It can range from the types of things that Michael highlights in his book, the high stakes corporate strategy engagements that McKinsey cut its teeth on, and I think likes to hold itself out as doing the best in the business, to things that are a lot more mundane. A lot of the work and probably the bulk of the revenue beyond the revenue of those three big firms is in implementation support. So things from technology implementations to process changes and change management exercises, things that certainly don't result in the types of salacious stories that you might get otherwise, unless they go totally awry. And so there's a lot captured under it, but in general, it's the offering of capabilities and advice that organizations don't have themselves.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a quick, obnoxious follow-up. You ready?
Sure.
How much of your advice doesn't give a damn about whether or not ethics are followed and optics look good, and how much is just, we got to improve the bottom line of this client, be damned?
I think that it's pretty easy to look at the stories that are highlighted in Michael's book and then try to extrapolate that to the entire industry and how it behaves. I think that more likely it's a case of corporate governance and ethics failures at one company, and certainly there's bad actors in any industry, but from my experience, and I think that the bulk of the industry and the people that work in it are highly ethical, doing work that they believe is good for their clients and society, and that doesn't just focus on boosting earnings for quarterly profits. There's a focus on ethics, on doing the right thing by clients and offering objective advice on what the best route forward is, regardless of whether or not that's focused on earnings or other outcomes as well.
Okay, Amanda Clark, going to come to you now. What words would you use to describe these firms?
So I look at this issue really from the perspective of the work that these firms are doing for governments and and I think I wouldn't use the word salacious. I think that Jaemin's right that it's often the tales we hear about McKinsey don't necessarily apply to the concerns that we should have about the role these firms play in shaping the work that our governments are doing. I think it's almost worrisome that it's not salacious, because I think we should all be really deeply worried about how much our governments are spending on these firms, about the quality of the work that they produce. And I think at a larger level, the threats that this poses to state capacity and democratic accountability.
We just happen to have right here a graphic standing by which shows exactly what you're talking about, Amanda. So, Sheldon, I'm on page 5 now. Can you bring that graphic up? There we go. If you want to look at how much money the Canadian government has been paying big management consulting firms over the last 5 years, here we go. In 2017, it was a little over $100 million, but it goes up and up and up and up every year to last year, 2021, when it's north of $400 million. The Globe and Mail reports McKinsey received $32.5 million in contract work in just 2022. That's an 89% increase from the year before. They've helped with everything from advice for immigration, defense, fixing the ailing Phoenix payroll system. And now we have some examples in the provincial realm as well. That was federal, this is provincial. McKinsey developed Ontario's pandemic response command structure. That was $1.6 million. They got $3.2 million from the Ontario government for COVID-19 recovery planning. In Quebec, they got $6.6 million from their government for pandemic management. And if we want to look at some others, Deloitte was paid an undisclosed sum to manage Ontario's vaccination campaign. They were also tasked with Quebec's COVID-19 screening system. That was a $12.4 million contract. And they were handed $16 million for the federal vaccine rollout contract. Okay, these firms, Amanda, are now kind of being referred to as a kind of shadow public service. Has it become difficult to tell the difference between who's actually a public servant on Parliament Hill and who's a management consultant?
Yes, it really can be. And I think this is part of a larger trend of hollowing out the state. We haven't been significantly investing in the capacities of our public servants for decades, and this is across Liberal and Conservative governments. And so if you find yourself in a position where you haven't been hiring in modern skills, or also taking a good hard look at how the federal public service is managed and revising things like HR practices and streamlining some of the red tape that can bog public servants down and make it difficult for them to be innovative and creative, then you get to a position where your default is to turn to these outside players. I think where we should be really concerned is that, as you noted, in some cases, it's not clear who's a public servant and who is a management consultant. They're being hired in and embedded within the public service. They have government email addresses. They have security clearances. In one case, a public servant told me that they actually couldn't access a government building, and someone from McKinsey swiped them in. I think that kind of beautifully captures what is going on in many of these cases. And where we need to be worried is that public servants should absolutely be leaning on outsiders for expertise and injecting a pluralistic sort of a range of ideas into the policy process. We don't need to pretend that government has a monopoly on good ideas. But if you don't have a core of expertise in-house and you're really hamstrung by unhelpful internal rules and accountability measures, then you can't hold these people to account. And you often are, I think, outsourcing not just delivery, but strategy and design and really core questions that should probably be left and should be managed by public servants who have an accountability to the minister.
Well, Michael, let me get you to weigh in on that, because I presume, now maybe this is hopelessly naive, but I would presume that governments wouldn't bring on outside consulting firms to do work that their own bureaucrats could do unless they felt that the talent outside was better than it was inside. Fair to say?
Mm-hmm. It's entirely possible. A lot of times, the ministers that will come in, have buddies that works at some of these consulting companies, and they bring them in. And this is not just a Canadian problem. This is a global problem. Certainly south of the border here in the United States, these consulting firms are everywhere in state and federal governments and local governments. Germany, has had a big issue with this, especially in the Defense Department there, or the Defense Ministry. France right now is absolutely agog over a McKinsey scandal over these same issues, this concern that this creeping influence of consultants in government. Saudi Arabia, also similar, South Africa. So it really is a global issue.
Jamin, I presume you interact both with politicians and with civil servants. Do you think cabinet ministers are at the point now where they actually trust you more than their own bureaucrats to get the best advice?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the cabinet minister and their disposition to the civil service.
Give me an example then.
Well, I think that we see conservative governments are less frequent in across Canada, both federally and provincially. And so after a long, period of governance by another party, you come into power, you want an agenda, you're voted in on an agenda that ostensibly is different than what's been done for a long time. And civil service is set up to move slowly, to manage risk, and ultimately to see the sort of downsides of all the options that are on the table. So, if you're elected in with an agenda of change, you've got a civil service that rightfully is there to, find the flaws in the things that you want to do and to resist moving quickly on things that might introduce risk into the system or might not clearly understand all of the issues that civil servants are working with and facing every day. And so,
another obnoxious follow-up here then. Is it also fair to say that some politicians bring on these consulting firms because these consulting firms have given them campaign donations or they're buddies from way back, and therefore they want to float some business their way?
Well, I think that to Michael's point, there's always a sort of relationship aspect to any consulting business. I'm sure that plays a role in some instances in governments across the world. I think Canada has a pretty good system in place to avoid the types of conflicts of interest that might introduce that. Certainly a lot of the things that are pointed to in terms of the relationship between McKinsey, let's say, and state governments and working on both sides of both the regulators and the regulated are not things that I think Canada's system really allows for. There's pretty strict controls on that. So, there isn't a lot of money flowing into the system that I think is there to purchase influence, and to the extent that relationships are built over time, that's no different than anyone in the political class who's building relationships and offering value to politicians and other people involved in that to try to drive change.
Okay, let me get Amanda's view on that as well. Do you think we're at the point now where cabinet ministers are more inclined to accept advice from outside consultants than from their own bureaucrats?
Not exclusively so. I think it's happening more within the public service. In some instances, public servants will tell me that they turn to these outside players because it's true that if they send something up the chain of command and it's sort of rubber stamped with like a Deloitte, letterhead, that the idea might be taken more seriously. Sometimes that is strategically why a public servant will turn to these players. I think more commonly what's happening is that where there's an immediate need, it's difficult within the public service to immediately compile a team or to bring in those skills because we've for so long kind of malnourished public sector capacity by relying on these players. So there's a resource dependency cycle that we're seeing here. And I think also a lot of vendor capture. One public servant told me that, we used to go to these players and say, this is what we need. And we had like a pretty good sense of what a good product would look like. And then we could scrutinize that and do the job of a good public servant, which is to evaluate the available evidence and then provide an analysis. But what's happening now is that it's gotten so bad that in some cases you're just turning to these players and saying, like, what do we need? You tell us, and then we're buying it. And I think we should be deeply worried about how much we spend on these firms and about the quality of the work, because a lot of, in many instances, the analyses that are being provided are not very strong. And they also have these firms have a particular way of framing problems and about thinking about solutions. They have their own kind of corporate frameworks that they'll push, whether that be, a staged model of digital government development. This is a really popular one. And it happens to be that that their framework also bakes in further contracts to help you move along that chain of evolution. A real emphasis on certain types of metrics, on evaluating problems with a kind of with quantitative data that is often questionable. As an alternative, you could imagine a world in which you had a core of capable public servants who really deeply understood the issue, and they were canvassing a whole range of players, different stakeholders, and incorporating those ideas into the policy process. But that's not what we're seeing here. And I think the other thing that we should be really worried about is that there are a lot of conflicts of interest, and there's a lot of cronyism at play here. It is very typical to scan a senior public servant's LinkedIn record and see that they move seamlessly from working in government to working for firms, sometimes in the IT vendor space especially, but the big management consultants as well, and they're leading their government practice. And clearly they're drawing on their connections in government to further the firm's profits. We should be worried about that, and that should be made more obvious. There should be much more data about how many of our public servants are working in these firms.
Let me get Michael on that. Michael, how much conflict of interest do you see?
There's quite a bit of conflict of interest. Around the world, there's a revolving door in with management consultings going into government, and vice versa. So many lawmakers in the United States, public officials, come from consulting. Our transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, is a former McKinsey consultant. Obviously, in Canada, you've got Dominic Barton, who became ambassador to China. So it's not surprising in some instances because these are very intelligent people, very connected people, and they do have quite a Rolodex, to use that archaic term. And so they're often very attractive, people to hire for government. One of the Fed governors in the United States is a former McKinsey consultant. There's an incredible number of those people.
Let me do a follow-up on that because, there's a ton of speculation right now that the President of the United States won't seek re-election in 2 years' time. And one of the names obviously being bandied about as a potential replacement for the Democratic presidential nomination is the aforementioned Pete Buttigieg, who's in Joe Biden's cabinet right now. If Buttigieg ends up being the nominee, and who knows, maybe president, and he's got this McKinsey business on his resume, what do you think that portends?
So I'm actually quite benign about that. He was at McKinsey only for 3 years. I think he learned a lot. And the important thing is he got out. He left. He left when he was young.
And signed an NDA as well.
He did, although I pushed very hard, very, very hard in breaking that story to make sure he was allowed to tell us his client list. And so he did. McKinsey let him announce his, the clients he worked for. But I think, he was young when he went to work for McKinsey. He was a Rhodes Scholar, just like Dominic Barton was, by the way. There are so many Rhodes Scholars that were at McKinsey. I started a spreadsheet on it. I had to stop. So the current managing partner of McKinsey is also a Rhodes Scholar. So anyway, he was a Rhodes Scholar, and McKinsey actually has a special program to recruit Rhodes Scholars, a specific program for that. And he was there at Oxford. He went to some meetings, and bada bing, bada boom, he was a McKinsey consultant. But I think it's rather benign. I'm pretty sanguine about that. I don't think it's going to portend a massive flow of dollars, contracting dollars to McKinsey.
Okay. Jaymin, I am curious as to whether or not your current situation at Strategy Corp would allow you to do what they say they can do at McKinsey, which is to say, if Strategy Corp wants you to take on a client that you are iffy about, can you turn it down?
Yeah, absolutely. We have turned down business. We will turn down business. We have very strict controls around conflicts of interest, real or perceived, and clear processes around how we'll communicate to clients about potential conflicts. There are a whole host of work that we won't even approach or touch because of the potential for conflicts. And so, for instance, there's a number of great examples there again of McKinsey both advising a regulator on regulations while at the same time serving clients that are looking to interact with those regulations and gain business in those markets. We would never do that and have conscious decisions around that. We also have specific policies around things like autocratic regimes or types of industries that we won't work with, and those things evolve over time. So,
are any of those autocratic regimes in Canada? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay, just checking. How about this generation of consultants, your generation of consultants, versus those of 25 or 50 years ago? What's the difference?
Well, I think things are changing dramatically, and I think that's part of the reason why probably Michael and Walt were able to get so many former McKinsey consultants to come out and actually speak to them despite that culture of secrecy. The values of every generation change, and it's changing. I haven't been working that long that I feel that old yet, but still when I hire a new grad out of school, their value set is even more different than it's a learning process for me to be able to interact with how they view how a corporation should behave ethically, the types of industries. It's pretty standard to have policies against working with tobacco companies for some companies. But evolving views on climate change and working with energy companies, working with the Department of National Defense, let's say. The new generation of consultants has different points of view on that. That'll continue to change, and ultimately the people are the product. And so if the values of the employees are changing, that's necessarily going to change, I think, the behavior of most of the consulting businesses.
Okay. Michael, we got a minute left here. Let me put this question to you, because the London Times had this to say about your book. They said, to accept the book's argument, the reader must buy into the notion that modern capitalism is bad, and therefore a firm that makes it work better is making the world worse. I wonder if you're laying the blame on one company when you should be laying the blame on capitalism as a whole.
I think it's total hogwash. I'm a capitalist, I'll admit it. I believe in the free market. There's one thing to be a capitalist, and there's one thing to be an irresponsible capitalist. Capitalism is an amazing tool, for economic growth, for innovation, but it does have to, it can get out of control. And in so many instances, McKinsey and consultants told us time and time again, McKinsey was an accelerant to some bad trends, and those need to be checked by government and a free press. So I'm all for capitalism, but I'm for responsible capitalism, and I don't think that makes me a radical.
Indeed. How's the reaction been to the book from McKinsey? Have you heard anything from them?
So they've been pretty quiet. They had a statement right after the book came out saying this doesn't really represent who we are. But they've been fairly quiet. Otherwise, a lot of people seem to be reading it, and so that makes us very happy.
Well, for what it's worth, we asked them to come on the program, and they declined our invitation, as did a lot of the other big players, although we're delighted to have Strategy Corp here today. So anyway, Michael Forsyth, your latest is When McKinsey Comes to Town, the hidden influence of the world's most powerful consulting firm. We thank you for coming on the program. J-Man and Amanda, great to have you aboard as well. Thanks, everybody.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.